Hey everybody, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Open One podcast. And I'm very happy to have Paul Burgess join me today. And we're going to get into the climate con narrative and just completely dismantle it, take it apart piece by piece, get into stuff like wind turbines, the sea level rising, or is it actually rising, and why we actually want more CO2. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so, would you like to just give a bit of introduction on yourself and why you got into this work and how it's been for you?
Okay, well, I'm an old man. I'm 77 now. So way back in 1970 and 71, I was water resource engineer for Cornwall, and the job was planning water resources. Actually, in the end, for the whole of the southwest, that's Somerset, Cornwall, and Devon, with working groups and things. And so my job was to develop systems to do that. And in doing that, I analysed 100 years of river data we had, of river flows. Now, they're rain-fed rivers, so all the water comes from the atmosphere, no springs and things. So I analysed it, and in doing that, I built a mathematical model, and the mathematical model had a very clear, distinct 11-year cycle within it, and that was the sunspot cycle. So lo and behold, I'd related river flows to the sunspot cycle, and quite strongly, quite a clear signal. And that meant that I was relating the rainfall to the sunspot cycle, and in effect relating the cloud cover to the sunspot cycle. So the more cloud cover there is, the less radiation reaches Earth, and the cooler it is. And so, in effect, I realized the significance of the sun very, very early on. And so that sparked my interest way back then. I mean, that's what, over 50 years ago. So over 50 years ago. So that's what started it all. And I've always had an interest ever since I was a kid. When I was 11, I was even contributing some pocket money, and I come from a very poor background. I think in one 3-bedroom terraced house, I think 4 or 5 families, really poor. And I was giving my pocket money, what I got when I was 11, to the Anglo Cooperative Association, which was fighting pollution in rivers. That's all it did. It was a legal fund to stop polluters. And I've always been interested in the environment. And of course, these days people tend to mix up pollution with climate change. Right? They're very distinct. So I'm a very big environmentalist. I'm very big anti-polluter. And I'm very much against the current climate change agenda. So that's what started it. And then as I went through my careers, I ended up still in the 70s, actually, in fact, in the 74, I think it was, yeah, in charge of the whole of Wales for water resources. And again, I found myself disrupting things. So I sat on basically what would be today Department of the Environment National Committee for the whole of the UK, and ended up, well, I met government really there for the first time, and how inadequate it is. They were planning a system, a computer system, and I'd already was heavily into computing then, and the mathematical modeling, etc. And I couldn't take the snail pace they were going at, so they actually said they were going to develop a national system, and these water resources, and they then employed Logica, who they paid £25,000 to see if it's feasible. Well, within 10 weeks of that, we developed the system and completed it back in Wales. And it cost us about 10,000 quid, our total costs. And so that's less than the feasibility study, 40% of the feasibility study. And the feasibility study reported back, and when it did, it reported back it would take 2 years and it cost £250,000. Well, it was all dead in the water because we'd done it. And so the whole industry came to Wales. And so that was my first bit of disruption. I ended up actually leaving the water industry and going into my own business, and became a disruptor there by inventing product after product, which changed some of the things, to today. And even today, I was sold that company, but my product is now voted the best in its type in America, for example. So I've always been a disruptor. I didn't realize until recently I was. But it's just that there is so much rubbish being spoken, above all, so much miseducation to children, that I just had to interfere. So I now do videos explaining how wrong what's going on is, and challenging people. I mean, we don't even have proper science today, because If I'm wrong on any of my videos, if I'm wrong in what I'm saying, I'm more than happy to learn. I'd rather be put right than be wrong. And science is about that. Science is about. And in my latest video, I've just published one of the rules of the IPCC, which is if anything comes up, basically, that's against the consensus, then it has to be put away, not to get in the way of the main message. And that's done by politicians. And in fact, the report to all the governments is done by politicians and not scientists. They'll even go against their own scientists. So, and the idea of consensus in science doesn't exist. But I'm accused, I'm accused of all sorts of things. And but what they never seem to do is actually argue with the points I make logically or the points I make scientifically. So that's what I do. And that's where I am.
It's really great work you're doing, and I believe it will continue to be quite powerful. When in the future, a lot of people will be referencing your material as like, hey, look, this is a very good source of information.
Don't forget it. In a way, it's just me exposing other people's work in a way, because all I do is try to take all the gobbledygook out of it, but give you the scientific facts, and give you the evidence for that. Even down to not just to the pure science, as it were, which is totally corrupted, but also down to the practical things. I mean, if you take wind power, I've done a recent video on that called "When the Wind Stops," episode 8. It's a whole series called "When the Wind Stops," and I was actually water resource engineer for Norwich in North Wales, which was the pump storage scheme. And that's biggest in Europe at the time, and it stored 9.1 gigawatt hours and released it at a rate of 1.74 gigawatts, I think. And they're planning a big pump storage scheme now in Scotland called the Curry one, which is 30 gigawatt hours, so total together it could look almost 40 gigawatt hours. But we had 9 days without wind in 2018. So as the wind drops, you've got to make that up. And you'd need 5,500 gigawatt hours. And we'd have, even if we built this big one, we'd have 40. We couldn't even run the UK for 1 minute, not 1 second, with our reserve power without gas. And the funny thing there, my take-home message is, believe it or not, look what the government have done. They've closed down nuclear a lot. And we were heading down to 2 gigawatts now. We've got about 4 roughly now, but we're heading to 2. What they've done is replace it with fossil fuel. So they've taken a non-fossil fuel source and replace it with gas, because that was the only thing that can quickly balance the wind. You can't have coal or nuclear balancing the wind, but they've actually gone into the baseload part, trying to make wind work with that, which is extremely costly. And I was on LBC, I've been on there lots of times, over 100, I think. And but in recent last few years, I haven't, because of the attitude of some of the presenters. I couldn't take it. And following me was Ed Miliband claiming that renewables are 9 times cheaper. That's a lie. That's just not true. We paid, well, you'll see later in my talk, what we did. So I get involved with the practical engineering aspects as well.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for that. And I really look forward to what you've got prepared for us. Cheers for taking the time.
Okay, well, shall we start now? And I'll show you the first slide.
Sounds good.
Now, if you go back to the Cambrian period, and I want people to just use common sense for all this. My job is to bring the science and the history of all this so everyone understands it. You don't have to be in any way educated to understand what I'm trying to teach. So this is being reconstructed from fossil records and so on. And no one's really arguing with the graph, by the way. The graph is not under debate. But back in the Cambrian period here, we had CO2 here. They're saying nearly 6,000. Some people argue it was 7,000, but it was certainly 15 or more times than we have today. And that was the biggest explosion in life on Earth. So when we had this super amount of CO2 in the oceans, we had the total explosion of all life forms that we know today came from that. Now, I want you to think about something. They moan today where it's approaching 420 parts per million. And they moan today about acidic oceans. Well, they're not acidic, actually. They're very alkaline, with a pH of about 8.1. And when it was 7,000, 6,000, 5,000, there was the biggest explosion in life on Earth. In fact, let's just look at some of the evidence of that, which I've got here. I'm going to introduce that now. Well, that's how big the shells were, enormous. I mean, the calcium and everything in the sea was enormous, right? And everything was on a giant scale back then. So we know back then, there was no problem with huge amounts of CO2, right? So I just wanted to show you that. So now, if you look over time, what happened? Well, CO2 is an essential part of life. So as life absorbed it, as all those shells absorbed it, they died and they dropped to the bottom of the ocean. And they formed things like limestone and coral reefs and all sorts of things. But they remove the CO2. Now, in this case, you can see the CO2 is a purple line. And it goes up and down, it wobbles. There's different reasons why. And then it starts to come down really bad. And there's the Carboniferous period. So look at this huge dip here where I'm putting the cross. Can you see the cross?
Yes.
Right. So that in that dip in the Carboniferous period was when the foundations, although it was about 300 million years ago, the foundations of all our fossil fuel today comes from, because that's when coal was formed. There wasn't any coal seams formed anywhere in the world outside that period. Why? Well, trees used to fall down and there were no bugs to eat them. So they get buried. So they were burying the carbon. Yeah. And that got compressed, volcanoes came along, all sorts of things happened. So we were taking CO2 out. But over time, the bugs wised up and thought we can eat this wood. So after this period where you've got this dip, the bugs were wised up here and started to eat the thing and release the CO2 back into the atmosphere. All coal comes from that period, right? People don't know that. So it carried on. You've got the Jurassic period, which we all know about, with the dinosaurs and everything. Man wasn't there, by the way. And you've got the ups and downs. Well, why do we have these up and downs of CO2? Well, the main reason is ice ages. When you get an ice age, which are caused by how the Earth relates to the sun, because the Earth is on an elliptical orbit around the sun, and sometimes it's further away than others. And also it tilts differently. At the moment, it's 23.5 degrees, but believe it or not, it keeps doing that. And the other one is it wobbles like top losing its speed, like a spinning top losing its speed. And the one cycle is 25,000 years, one cycle is 40,000 years, and the other cycle is 100,000 years. And those cause the ice ages. It's called the Milankovitch cycles. And no one really disputes that either, because the work that was done by that man in Eastern Europe in the 1920s with hundreds of women mathematicians, because all the men had been taken off to war. So he had to use women, and the women mathematicians worked, because they didn't have computers, worked it all out. And so ice ages, when it cools, water when it cools absorbs CO2. When it warms, it gives off CO2. And throughout these ages, if you plotted the temperature and the CO2 properly, the CO2 came after the cooling and after the warming. So in other words, the oceans warmed, gave off CO2, then it wasn't the cause of it. Well, that's a very well-known thing. So over time, we came down. But look at this. As you get to this area here, it just completely collapses throughout all these things as we get into a lot of life burying limestone alone, enormous quantities of buried CO2, which is why when you make cement with it today, it's responsible for 5% of CO2 is some concrete making, cement making for concrete. So there we are. So we came down to a drought. We were in a CO2 drought until this little kink here in the corner where mankind started to pump CO2 in. Now, we were also coming through the little ice age. So people are arguing we should go back to go back to pre-industrial. Well, what do you want to go back to? Huge crop failures. You want to go back to blinking freezing all the time. You want to go back to a world where you couldn't possibly support today's population, because, as I'll show you later, the CO2 why they pump it into a greenhouse. You can get all the extra growth. So that is the history of CO2. So it's purely accidental we ended up there. And the question then becomes, what would happen if man didn't pump in the CO2? Pure luck came our way. And what I'm going to do now is close that image, try and get this faster, and bring up the next image, which is what would happen if mankind hadn't been here. Right. So what would happen is in about 2 million years, all the plants would die because below 150, plants can't exist. So, and on the way there, we had terrible droughts, terrible famine, and so on. So, in other words, without the extra CO2 man's put in, we were heading for oblivion of all higher forms of life on the planet.
Now that's very interesting. That puts us in a whole different perspective of us putting CO2 into the environment,
Yes,
keeping ourselves
CO2
alive.
CO2 is the gas of life. It's in very small
I
concentration.
love that. That's such a just to hear you say that. And I saw your video, More CO2, Please, and that title is just like so controversial, and I love it because it's like it goes against what the mainstream media is just pumping out there. CO2 is bad. We must reduce net carbon, net zero, all this. So to hear you even say that is really awesome. So I'd love to see what you're
Carbon net zero is madness. It's like saying net life.
No, yes,
it is, because
zero life.
in America, they've declared CO2 a pollutant, which is the essence of life, absolutely the essence of life. So I just want to show you what would happen. Now, let me try and do the next one. Okay, so all these COP meetings, we're in COP27 at the moment. All these COP meetings, I've got another graph with more plotted on, but every one of them makes no difference at all to the growth of CO2. Every one of them. The CO2 is now 2.5 times more going in every year than there was 30 years ago. Right? So in actual fact, they don't achieve anything, nothing. And it's just a pretense. It's the king's clothes. The king is riding along totally nude, and or the emperor, and everyone's pretending he's dressed in a wonderful costume. Yes. That's exactly what it is. It's the madness of crowds. And then, someone has to pipe up, hold on here, he hasn't got any clothes on. That's me. Yeah. And look at it. So what are they achieving? They haven't achieved anything. So do you realize now, it's in the Telegraph this week, the Daily Telegraph, the cost of the climate problem now is much more than the cost of the NHS. Yeah, much more. Can I also point out another statistic? China has put in more CO2 in the last 8 years than we have since the Industrial Revolution. More CO2 in 8 years than we've put in since the Industrial Revolution.
But you're suggesting that that could actually be a good thing.
I am, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I am. I'm totally happy about it. I'm ecstatic about it, but I'm not ecstatic about people want reparations for it. I'm not ecstatic about the fact that somehow when we put in a tiny fraction of the CO2 and people say we're 1%, we're no longer 1%, we're less than 1%. They somehow want repatriation for the Industrial Revolution, which gave the world so much, extended lifespans, gave the world medicines, gave the world everything, really. And they should be congratulated for it. So it's a part of the history change that's going on today in all sorts of aspects. So there we are. And this is since 1990s, really, the sea level rise, yes? And Al Gore predicted. Al Gore's movie, for which he got a Nobel Prize, The Inconvenient Truth, was wrong in every single thing he predicted. No, it was. But recently, the man who came up with the system for a single weather event as a fingerprint of climate alarmism using regression analysis, which comes from economics, really, used totally the wrong method. And factually, like the maths lesson, first term of statistics, you'd be marked 0. And the man who came up and pointed this out in a scientific paper, they all done it wrong, the maths, he actually got nothing. But the one who invented it wrongly got a Nobel Peace Prize. That's the way we go these days. No, not Peace Prize, a Nobel Science Prize. Anyway, look at Al Gore's prediction and look at the different position, the IPC. But the actual data is very small. Yes, there it is, the red line at the bottom. There's the actual sea rise. Is it rising? Yes. But it's been rising ever since the last ice age. And initially it was going up like a rocket. And then it curved down like this and is very slow in the region of 1 millimeter a year. But the professor in charge of the sea rise committee for the IPCC, a Swedish professor, the world expert on sea level rises with more papers and awards than anyone else, he left it. He said, well, I'm sitting over something that's not happening. right? So he and one of my videos on this, I introduce you to his work and say, look at this, Professor, pointing out the sea levels aren't that rising. Now, if you actually take an individual, let's have a look at the post-glacial. So we go to the next graph now. This is the post-glacial sea level rise I just mentioned. So what we're saying is, I'll start down here. And of course, when the ice melted, and by the way, we didn't have any cars or anything going on then. We really didn't, okay? We were just about clinging onto life as a species, but not up here in the cold part. But the ice melted and the seas rose. Look how steeply the seas rose. And this is all these separate points. And all of this was natural until it gets to this flat bit. And this is all natural. Now, you can't really see it because the last millimeter here is man-made, apparently. Yes? So what they're saying is, so yes, the actual measurements we're doing now tally with this. Around about a millimeter a year. Yeah. I live on the coast. My garden is actually got a spillway down onto the beach. I live there. And I can tell you. And of course, Al Gore has a holiday where he lives. He's got a big home, multi-million-pound home, right on the beach. Mind you, so has Obama and quite a few others, who tell us all about the sea levels rising. Yeah. And as a sailor, I can tell you they don't change the tide tables very much, right? So this is total fiction. And if you look at all the different tide gauges around the world, and it's more complicated than you think. For example, the sea's falling in Sweden. Not really. What's happening is the land's rising, because where you've got the ice age over Scotland, where you had it over Canada, where you had it over the north, like in Sweden and Europe, when it went, it had compressed the miles of ice, it compressed the earth, and it's still coming back up now, which is why down the east coast of America, you've got it below a certain point, you've got it sinking, whilst you've got Canada rising. So Canadian sea level rises are negative, whereas the east coast is being pushed down as the land rises up north. Yes. So, and we've even got graph on one of my videos. I've done a graph. It's a graph. I did a graph on a castle that William the Conqueror, when he came to Britain, landed at his castle. And it was right on the coast, but it's now over a mile inland. Yeah. And so I do a video on that as well. There's one of my videos that goes into that. So I try to combine humor as well with it. They used to have a sea gate there that if you were naughty, they just shoved you out the gate and you fell into the sea, and that's your lot. Yeah. And of course, you just land in grass today. So that's what. So again, everything. Polar bears are record numbers. But the reason that the record numbers is pretty simple. The Arctic nations who surround the Arctic, Russia, Canada, and so on, Greenland, and so on, sorry, and of course that's Denmark, Greenland, and then Iceland, they all agreed to stop shooting polar bears in the 1970s. And since then, they've just boomed. And today, they've almost become a nuisance. And the way they had the holiday places where you go and see polar bears, you have to go with protection and everything, and you live in a wooden building. They had to, well, they only live in tents. They had to abandon the tents because the polar bears were coming in them. Then they had to abandon the wooden buildings. Now it's a real problem. The tourist industry stopped because there's too many blinking polar bears, as it were. So all these scare stories, not one, and I challenge anyone watching this, tell me one scare story that's come true. There aren't any. But if you had someone outside your house with a placard walking up and down saying, next Monday, the earth is going to fall apart. Well, when it
yes.
And then it didn't happen. So the following Monday's there and it's going to fall apart. If he keeps on doing this year after year after year, you'd lose confidence in this man, wouldn't you? Say, there's old Jack again, he's nuts. We need to start doing that with the COP meetings and with this alarmism. A whole industry is built up on it, an entire industry. And today, if you speak out, I did a video on this. Let's take the Great Barrier Reef and how it's been suffering, and David Attenborough, and it's dying. Yes? The truth is, after a 30-year study now, released by an independent organization, but a government one, unfortunately, it is government one, it's one who studied the reef for 30 years, it's the healthiest it's ever been in recorded history. That's a Great Barrier Reef today. But the scientist who was employed by Cook University, who led the team on this, was sacked for saying that. he lost his job for saying it's the healthiest. And the IPCC is not a political body. Sorry, not a scientific body, it's a political body. And the politicians write the summary for policymakers, which what dictates policies around the world. And one of the rules is no one is allowed to raise a subject that goes against that policy of basically alarmism. No one's allowed to. And scientists who do are pulverized. But today, if I wanted to get a grant to study the sex life of sparrows in Essex, I wouldn't stand a chance. But if I said I want a grant to study the sex lives of sparrows in Essex and how climate change has affected them, yes, I'd get one. And the whole industry now, it's one of the biggest industries, if not the biggest in the world now, is climate alarmism. Al Gore has made fortune out of carbon offsets. So it's great. I mean, Drax Power Station, 37,000 tons of wood pellets a day. 37,000 tons of wood pellets a day. The biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe is Drax Power Station, ours. And the subsidy is it's 800 million, almost $1 billion a year subsidy from the taxpayer. It's a great system. You cut down trees in America, and you have all the industry in America, big machines, fossil fuel machines, then they put them onto these massive trucks, and they take them to a pelletizer station. And in there, they use fossil fuels to smash them up and heat them and make the nice dry pellets. And then they put them on a train, chug, 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 all across big America to the East Coast, where they put them on a ship. And the ships, big ships, commercial ships, and all liners really, use a very dirty, cheap diesel. It's very dirty, cheap diesel. Only normal diesels used to start the engine. Once they're going, use the cheap stuff. So they cross the Atlantic to the East Coast of England, and then they put on another train, chug, 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 and then they burn the pellets. And then they plant a tree to say we put it back. No. First of all, if there was a climate emergency, they must have blinking fast-growing trees, because the trees were taking 30 to 40 years to grow. If it was a climate emergency, it wouldn't happen, would it? But they don't even replace all the fossil fuel they've used in doing this. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you name it, it's ridiculous. Okay, so there we are with that. Okay, I am a water resource engineer, so it's right up my street. But I looked recently, because people are going on about droughts more and all this nonsense. I didn't believe in the postpipe ban this year, and I wouldn't have issued one. I used to pick up the red phone and phone up the police and wake up whole valleys of people for flood warnings and things like this. I was in charge of all this. Anyway, this is accumulated deficit, which is, to understand accumulated deficit, just think about your bank balance. It gets worse every month because it keeps on adding. You know, one repays it, so the overdraft grows and grows. So if you measure it by that, the most severe to the least, these are the dates: 1765, 1784, 1854, 1996, a contemporary one, then back to 1933, then the 76 drought, then 1942, 1780, 1921, and 1844. That's the top 10. And no matter how you rank droughts, there's other ways of doing it. No matter how you rank drought, let's rank them another way. So there's the rank by duration. This is how long the drought lasts. Yeah? Well, you just look at the column there. The left-hand column will do. Much worse than the past. Much worse. So hurricanes are much worse than the past. Droughts are much worse than the past. Floods were much worse than the past.
That's interesting. So why do you think that is? It's even like hurricanes. Why would they be worse?
Very simple. Or I can give you the simple physics of that. The simple physics is this. All the global warming models, and everyone agrees that when you warm up the planet, it's towards the poles warms, not the equator part, yes? Not the middle. So it warms towards the ends, yes? So as the planet warms, there's less difference between the tropics and the north or the south, yes? Between the two ends. What's the job of a hurricane? The job in nature of a hurricane is to take the excess heat from the tropics and send it spiraling up north. Here's a pile of heat for you. Here's a pile of heat for you. Yes, that's its job. The less extreme that is, the difference, the less difference, the less hurricanes.
Fascinating. Yeah.
All you do is you take each hurricane and you work out how much energy is in each one. Because hurricanes, you can have 2 big ones or 4 little ones, but just add up the add up the energy each year and then plot it on a graph, and you'll see it's declining. And it should decline because the planet has warmed. The planet's warmed over 1 degree since the Industrial Revolution. And thank God, because they want us back there. They want us back in all the cold. Even Dickens, all the stories in Dickens and the snow and the cold and everything, a totally different world back then. So it's a good job, isn't it, that we have warmed. And if you take something like this, I think people have said, we've lost something like 7,500 people due to heat waves in this last year. Well, we actually gained, due to the cold of 7,500. Sorry, we've lost 7,500 due to heat waves, but to cold, we've lost 500,000 because people are far more sensitive to cold than they are to heat waves. We lose more people die in cold spells than they do in heat waves. That's just a fact of statistics. So, in fact, a bit of warming is great. We should have warmed, and we should welcome more CO2. And that's what no one is doing on telly. I was on, there's a bloke called Matt on LBC, and it made me, I had 2 sessions with LBC. I used to be on dozens. I've been on over 100 times, I think. And then I mentioned climate change, and his words were, I should be ashamed of myself. And I saw him on television yesterday on GB News, one of the programs, sitting there saying, that it's all settled, the science. It's not. He's just ignorant, absolutely ignorant. So that's where we are. All these things you're being told are not true. And they've even changed the past data to fiddle it all. And, anyway, we'll now go on. I could go on about more drought rankings, but I won't. I'll now go to, I used to, in effect, be part of, it wasn't called it that day, but the Environment Agency. And this is what the Environment Agency said. This is current in the UK. This is what the government agency, the Environment Agency, say about droughts in Britain. It is clear that throughout historical records, drought have been a recurring feature of the UK climate, with recent drought events by no means exceptional in terms of intensity of duration. They're being political. So no exceptions at all. The impression that from this limited study, there's a repeated tendency throughout historical records for dry years to cluster together. Totally agree. And multi-year droughts that contain shorter, more intense periods, 1798, 1808, and they repeat some of the droughts I've been going on about. You with me? So my data on my video, I back up with the Department of the Environment Agency report on the subject. But people don't know about that, do they? It isn't me being a mad scientist sort of thing on this. It's me using science and using history sometimes, because science should agree with history. And it does. My science agrees with history. Their science doesn't. Yeah. So that's that one. Let's now take this next one. I'm going to move on now to why we're paying more now. First of all, the Ukraine war has put up temporarily the price of energy. Yes, it has. But we shouldn't be in that position. We should have been fracking and nuclear long ago. And I'm going to prove the government wrong now. Today, the government are desperate to build nuclear. So they've now reversed the policy, which was not having nuclear. We've let our nuclear decline. It's heading now, it's only about 4 gigawatts now and heading down to 2. So it's tiny compared to what it was. And here's something that people don't understand. In my recent video, When the Wind Stops, episode 7, the move to wind has increased the amount of gas we use.
That's a good one, yeah.
It is. And the move away from nuclear, has been replaced with gas. So we're now much more sensitive to gas than we ever were. We have been placed into this ridiculous sensitive position regarding our energy supplies through government negligent policies of both sides for the last 30 years. We really have. It is their fault. It is not the Ukraine war, because we should have been independent easily by now. Yeah. The fracking. Let's just take a bit of a fracking on that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on fracking?
Oh, definitely support it. Look, America can frack a well, and our sensitivity analysis before that is over 32,000 times more sensitive than they're allowed to do in America. Right, it's a 0.5 on the Richter scale, which is a logarithmic scale. But let me explain this. To measure all right, which country in the world has numerous earthquakes every year? Really bad, well, not say bad, but lots of earthquakes. And the answer is Wales, actually, and the UK, but mainly a lot in Wales. Yeah, we have earthquakes every day in Wales. Yeah, you can't feel them because any earthquake below a Richter scale of about 3, right? So the difference between a 2 and a 3 is 10 times. And the difference between a 1 and a 3 is 100 times. Yeah, and you're literally looking at 1,000 times. But a 3, you have to use deep sensitive equipment to measure. You can't feel a 3. But they're saying something 1,000 times less than that, we can't allow, right? A lorry passing in the next but one street to you causes more than that. It's that sensitive. It's that stupid what we've done. We should increase the Richter scale to 2.5, which you still won't feel. Yeah, you still won't feel. But building sites do more than that. Heavy machines driving do much more than that in an area. You don't know about them. Okay, so that is ridiculous. And then the other argument, and the water resource engineers don't forget, the other argument is water. Well, they're fracking 2 kilometers down. The water part's tiny, so hundreds and hundreds and maybe 1,000 feet of solid rock between them. There's no question of it polluting water. That's silly. It really is silly. There's no question of that. So that's another one, and so on. So through sheer ignorance and fear, worst of all, what the governments have done is they put fear into children, educated children. Totally, people who now they're in the 30s have had a whole education all their life of climate alarmism, because it really started seriously in about 1998. They've had 24 years there. So say you were 5 then, you'd be 29 now. So anyone who's 29, 30 now has had it all the way through, brainwashing. And it's terrible. It's total ignorance. And they can only do, say, relatively settled science. But don't forget, the settled science of 1960 was we had a steady state universe, not the Big Bang. The settled science of stomach ulcers was totally different. And the doctor who got it right, by the way, on stomach ulcers was practically pilloried and died a pauper. And years later, they found out he was right and they were all wrong. Yeah. So science, all science is to everyone, don't be scared of science. It's just trying to understand how the world works. That's science. It's trying to understand how the world works. That's all it is. So, don't let them baffle you. And I try to use, I don't use big words if I can help it on my videos. I use plain English and I try to explain properly. But I've just done a video now on wind, on my episode 7, when the wind stops, episode 7, which was fascinating. And in doing the video, I discovered things I didn't know because I had to do a lot of research. And the problem was in 2018, we had 9 days without any wind power. Yeah, 9 days. Now, how long Norwich can store 9.1 gigawatt hours of energy, but it can only release it at about 1.7 gigawatts. That's the rate coming out. That's the size of the hole, if you like, coming out. Yes. Now, on the new Corrie one in Scotland, the planning it's 3 times bigger. It does 30 gigawatts. We would need, just to replace the 9 days, 5,500 gigawatts. And at the moment, we've got 12. How long can we run the UK for if we didn't use gas? How long, we're using nuclear, using biomass, which I hate, but we've got, using those things, and when the wind stops, how long can we run without gas, the UK? Well, the answer is not even a minute. In fact, not even a second, because you'd have to replace something like, we've only got about 8 gigawatts of actual stable power, which is biomass and nuclear, a tiny bit of coal and things. We've only got about 8 gigawatts of it. So we go peak in the day to about 40. So we need 32 gigawatts every hour. So we'd have to have 32 gigawatt capacity to replace it even for 1 second. We haven't. We've got 8. Yeah, without gas. So we're totally dependent on gas more than we've ever been. And now the Ukraine war's happened and the gas supply affects us more. They say, oh, we don't take much from the Ukraine. All right, our biggest gas supplier is Norway. And when you look into this, Norway gets a lot of electricity from hydroelectric, and hydroelectric is a great form of electricity. It's clean in every way, really. It's beautiful electricity to me. And I don't mean more CO2 is clean to me, but it's clean. and they get their energy from that. But this year they've had a run on low reservoir levels, which I've published. I published these on my video. And the one UK, we may have to use some gas to supplement. Therefore, we may not be able to give you all the gas we need. Now, on wind, when the wind doesn't blow, and a group of MPs, committee of MPs, looked into 3 Scottish wind farms, yeah, and they discovered to the horror that almost 50% of the time we're paying them to switch off and not give us the energy, because we still pay even when we don't want it. Because the deal is anything they can produce, we have to pay for. Today we're paying the same as gas, so they're making a fortune. But you get Ed Miliband saying stupid things like 9 times cheaper. That is total nonsense. But so we're paying 50% of the time not to. Why? Well, overnight our demand drops. But it's stormy overnight, or there's lots of wind overnight. We can't use it. So we have 2 options. One option is pay them and say, well, we're going to pay you, shut it down. And the other option, which we've done this year, is sell it to Belgium by us paying them negative. In other words, we pay them to take it from us, because we have to keep the grid in balance. You can't have surplus. You can't have surplus power on the grid. So we pay Belgium to take the power from us.
Madness.
And when we had the hot day, which was done, measured in Heathrow, was lovely. They actually took a temperature. I'm doing a video now, which isn't out yet, but I've just done one where I show you where the temperature was measured for Heathrow. It's on the runway with jets passing over it and everything, yeah, but they measured it at 40 degrees in Heathrow. They take one day in one place and then say it's climate. It is absolute nonsense, yeah. So and then they take, oh, but Kew Gardens was similar. But Kew Gardens is also in what we call the urban heat island effect. But I do lots of videos going into each individual thing to build up an entire picture. I can't, in a small podcast like this, if you like, cover everything, you know. So so there we are with that. So we haven't got the energy, nor can any feasible thing coming like hydrogen or anything cope with a shortage of wind. And actually, while I've taken 9 days as one example, the video points out there's much worse conditions than that. So in 1 month, I take 1 month where we're below 10%. Germany now, I've just got details from Germany. Their wind farms, they're the biggest wind farm people in the amount, 500 billion pounds worth of wind. And look how desperate they are for gas. The reason is wind needs more gas, not less, because the gas is fast to come up. You can't use nuclear, it takes weeks to go up. We can't use coal, that's too slow. We have to use gas to replace the wind quickly. And they are now on average 15% of the rated capacity on wind. They're going bust left, right and centre. In fact, Germany is just actually, when the one company owns a wind farm and a coal mine, they're just knocking down the wind farm to extend the coal mine in Germany, and they're burning dirty brown coal, not like our good coal here, and so on. You couldn't make this story up. So what sort of system do you have to pay when you don't need it? What sort of system, when you've got too much, do you have to pay to have it taken away? And what sort of system, when it collapses completely, when it did in this last year when it was hot, it cost us 50 times more than normal to buy it from Belgium, because we have to bid on an auction and we can't afford not to have it. So we paid 50 times more for the gas than we normally pay, for the electricity than we normally pay, right? It's madness. No one, and a child could not, if a child did this scheme, you'd say to them, if a 10-year-old came with a scheme like this, you'd explain how the world works, you know, and our government don't know this. And by the way, Labour are worse. You know, they want to treble the wind farms. And of course, Rishi Sunak is really up the creek. You know, he wants more wind farms. This makes the problem worse. You end up with more wind farms standing still, because it happens over the whole, not just to the UK, but it happens with low wind over Europe. Yeah. So you naturally have a situation where treble the wind farms are giving you nothing.
Yes.
Yeah? And then you're meant to store the energy, but no one's come up with any viable scheme. And that's why my video, Stopping the Wind, episode 7, goes and explains the maths. It does works it out and shows you the graph, works out how much energy you need. Now impossible. And by the way, the biggest battery in the world. Now, don't forget, we'd be looking at 32 gigawatts an hour. Yes? Per hour. So in a day, you'd look at 24 times 32, 600 or 700 gigawatts. Yes? That's what we'd need. So what's the biggest battery in the world? It's in California, in America. And it's 1.6 gigawatts. 1.6, but only for 4 hours. It outputs 0.4 of a gigawatt for 4 hours, and that's your lot. But if we then worked out the cost of putting batteries in, it comes to 20 trillion pounds. But it's worse than that because we haven't got the resources in the world to do it. Whilst I'm on that, we haven't got all the resources in the world to turn all the diesel and petrol cars into electric cars either. I have a Tesla, by the way, not because of CO2. And I actually know I produce more CO2 by having it than that. And I fuel it with CO2. That's why my house, you hear people like Octopus Energy, who are a good company. I'm not arguing, they are a good company. And they'll say, we supply green energy. They don't really. What you're getting is the mix of energy of fossil and everything else. And what it means is we'll pay for the offset. If you pay us more, we'll buy the offset for you. So you pay into people like Al Gore, who've made the hundreds of millions out of it. Yes. So that's where we are with it. And you couldn't make this world up. You really couldn't.
Clown world.
Pardon?
Clown world.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Now I'm going to, this is really interesting. Look at the bottom, Fig 3. Monthly wind power availability averaged over 34 years of wind speed data in the UK. Yes. So when they say it's 100, this can supply 1 million houses, this wind farm, that's rubbish, absolute rubbish, right? What they quote is if it's 100% and the wind is perfect every day. Actually, if it's too much wind at times, they have to switch off because it can damage the vanes. And when it's too low, they don't work at all. Yes. But they've worked out the long-term average is 30%. You only get less than a third out of what they say. But it's worse than that, because in actual fact, it's more like 15%, because we are having to pay them to switch off and so on. So it's not the 30. That 30 is assuming they could sell it. We need it, which we don't. So it's more like 15%. So in my videos, I work out how many houses actually can be supplied from all these schemes. And it's not like they say. Yeah. And it's just simple maths. There's no, I'd love someone to argue with me. Come and prove me wrong. So I deal with the actual day-to-day engineering, or if you like, the scheme, and how impossible it is. 34 years of wind. So it's not me. Look, in July, we're down to 20% anyway. So you'd be lucky to get 10% out of that usable. Yeah. We got that? Any questions on that?
What just keeps striking my mind is why do you think they're actually doing this? Do you think it's being done on purpose? Do you think they're deliberately mismanaging the country because certain people are getting rich off of all these turbines?
Oh, certainly the people. You can't blame anyone. I know someone who owns a very big house, very, very massive house, and hundreds of acres around it and everything, and they use biomass, and they use big machines to heat this house with the pellets, the pellets go into this huge burner, and it's subsidized. So this man not only heats this mansion, but he heats it and makes £26,000 a year profit.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Getting paid to heat your home.
Well, it pays farmers to have swim spas open and leave them open all the time, half a dozen swim spas, to just use up all the heat, because they're paid per kilowatt they burn.
That's fascinating.
Again,
yeah.
A child could work out a better scheme.
Yes.
A child could. If you tell someone, it's a bit like the farming in the old mountains of food, we had too much of this and too much of that in the EU, because the EU said, we will pay you a certain price for your corn, and regardless of anything else. So all the hedgerows in East Anglia were taken out because every strip of land would make money now. You didn't have a risk thing. So if someone said to me, I make widgets, and someone said to me in a factory, and I have my own factories in the past, I've had my own businesses, and if someone said to me, you're making a widget, Paul, can you please, we're going to give you a price of £10 a widget, and it cost me £8 to make it. Well, I'd open up new factories. I'd open up as many factories as I could, because I'm guaranteed a profit. That is what they did to farming and built up these mountains. Yes. Why are they doing it today? They're brainwashed, because what they won't do is discuss it with me. They are totally, well, you only have to look at any government computer project. They all go way over budget. The one I gave an example of when I was on the government committee, cost, well, it was going to take 2 years. It took 10 weeks. It was going to cost 250,000. It cost 10 with me doing it. Yeah. So that is the sort of waste we have with government. Government and the people in government are not very scientific. They're not very practical, and they are really bamboozled by science. You could argue that to some extent on the recent COVID problems. They're really bamboozled by science, and they don't think. I would love to have a television debate with one of these people, on just the wind farms, and look at my video on episode 7, and then take it apart. Tell me where I'm wrong, because there's the figures. These are all government figures. They're not my figures, and it's not possible. So they're idiots. That's all I can say. But you've got people like Ed Miliband going around saying green energy, renewables are 9 times cheaper, ignoring all the real costs. Well, I tell you this: when wind is zero, or when they can't produce any energy from the wind, the cost of wind's infinite, because we have to do so much. And for every megawatt of wind power we build, and don't forget, you only get a fraction of what they claim here, as per this graph. For every megawatt we build, we have to build a megawatt of gas power. We have to, because when the wind doesn't stop, where does the energy come from? And no one can answer that except gas. There's nothing else. People will tell you all about mad schemes for doing this, or sand batteries. But you'd need 10,000 of the big sand batteries, like a silo outside a farm, and you'd need 10,000 of those to produce 1 gigawatt, and you couldn't get the heat out fast enough, because heat takes a long time to build up and a long time to dispel from a big center. You can't get it out fast enough. So it is 2 things. It's the amount of energy you can store into Norwich, 9.1 gigawatt hours, and the rate at which you can output it, 1.74 gigawatts. Those are the 2 factors. Yeah. So that's where we are with that. So, and now let's look at a typical month. And I am taking a typical month here, typical months. Right. This is well, it was today when it was taken, of course, but this is this year. And this is the wind. Let's go to the last month there, which I think is July. This was taken in August. So this is the amount of wind and how it varies. So here, all these dips. Gas is doing all the white bit. They claim, wind has 50% now of our energy. Rubbish. The 50% mark there across the top, right? All the white is gas. All the blue is wind. And we have to fill in that mountain with gas. That's how it works. Yeah. And if you take the whole of last year, if you want to see a whole year, bottom right here, the whole year, you can see how bad it is.
Yeah.
So wind is absolutely useless as a power source. It's medieval, and it's taken us back to the medieval time.
Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, we've been using wind turbines for ages. You think of like flour mill or whatever. It's like, okay, surely there must be something better we can be doing here.
Well, yes, I mean, Lord Frost was onto this. Lord Frost, he made it clear, and he used the term, which I picked up on from him actually, that it's medieval. By the way, there's that same graph as the May, right? And I put gas in. The red's the other sources. The wind is what you get.
But it's very important the work you're doing to get the word out about this whole climate con, because you mentioned COVID, that was like a sort of a quick big bang of absolute fuckery. But this one is more of a long lasting thing that's really going to have a big impact on. Well, we're feeling the impact right now. Energy prices going through the roof and all that. And you're saying we don't actually need to be in a situation, and I totally agree.
Totally avoidable. This graph here is the sea level in Australia, a place in Australia, and you notice how it's rising, as I've always said, it's rising but it's rising in a straight line. If it was accelerating through to man-made global warming, it'd be curved up. But all of the tidal gauges around the world tend to be just in a straight line. It's because it's not accelerating like they claim, right? Now I'm going to play a tiny movie. Yep. So here's Al Gore, the man who's made millions, who builds his house on the seashore, yes, predicting sea level rises and so on. And he's talking about the Arctic, which again is a total nonsense. And this is in 2007. What did he have to say?
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now.
So what can happen in 7 years? I'll tell you what, no Arctic ice. We can sail across it. Yeah? No Arctic ice can happen in 7 years, according to Al Gore. Yeah? In actual fact, there's more ice now than when he spoke.
See, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's more ice now than there is in 2007 when he claimed all that. I'm trying to make sure I've got rid of that now.
Because there's been an increase in temperature, right?
Yes.
But only like a degree in however long.
Yep.
But there's actually more ice. That's interesting. Is it like some places are warmer and some places are colder? Or how does
No,
it work?
what they did was they fiddled it. Now, what you're going to see now is a short movie on a fiddle, because I can explain better in video sometimes than I can just talking. So this is from William Happer, part of it, who's a great guy. He's probably one of the best people with my views on the internet as a site. But I'm now going to explain how they fiddle things. Yes. So I'm going to put the lie of Arctic ice by taking an excerpt out of my videos. I'm going to put the lie to bed. Then I'd like you to ask questions afterwards. Okay. So I've got to share it. Right. And I'm going to play this. Now, Professor Morner is the one I mentioned. He's the world expert on sea levels. And he used to chair the UN Sea Level Committee. And he left to expose the lack of science. Okay. I'm in good company, aren't I? And for this, we'll go to a world expert on sea level rise, Professor Morner from Sweden. This is a list of his qualifications. He's even been given awards for his contribution to sea level science. He has publicly slammed the so-called scientists, the alarmists, for the way they operate, almost like a mafia in suppressing opposition. As he explains here, you're not allowed to go against the consensus. And I repeat, that is not science. The alarmists even organize a blacklist, the antithesis of science. Now, here's a little question before you go any further. Are the seas throughout the world just finding their own level? So basically, you have the same mean sea level, allowing for tides, etc., throughout the world. The emphatic answer to that question is no. There are major variations in sea levels throughout the world because of the spinning of the Earth, because of geological factors, etc. Enormous variations. But here's an interesting fact. Just with the Gulf Stream, which carries more water than all the rivers of the world combined, in that Gulf Stream, the center could be 5 meters higher than the edges. Professor Morner studies the science in the field. He measures the sea levels. He looks at the coastal erosion. He looks at the continental plates moving below the sea. He examines all the physical factors to determine the history of sea level and therefore predict its future. To do this, he splits the factors into 3 main groups, as shown here. As you go into the science of this, you find out that the actual satellite telemetry shows no significant rise at all in the world's sea levels. The ENSO event shown in this graph is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, and it's a periodic thing that happens, and it's well understood. But after that, the sea level returned to normal, with no trend at all. So what is Professor Morner's conclusion? Well, his conclusion is that sea level may be rising up to 1 millimeter a year, which is a centimeter every 10 years, or 10 centimeters in 100 years. And that's as we come out of the mini ice age. As we deal with all the failed climate alarmist predictions, I think it's important to understand the techniques they use to deceive you. And so we're now going to turn to that, because this gives a background to explaining how you're being fooled. And we will start with the starting date con. Just imagine that this pattern here, this wave, is a cycle of rainfall or temperature or any weather event. And say there was a cycle, just pretending for the moment, and that cycle kept repeating itself like this wave does. Well, what would happen if you just took a part of the wave, and in that part of the wave, you cut it off at the lowest point and then showed just the part coming up, and then gave a scare story on, wow, things are happening, things are increasing. that would be a very distorted picture because you're just showing part of the curve. Well, that's one of the tricks the alarmists do, and they choose different starting dates depending on the subject they're following. To explain this, I've taken a section from probably the best climate change site on YouTube, and that's Tony Heller. I'll hand over to him to show how this con is practiced on this particular one, Arctic sea ice.
Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate science guy setting the record straight about climate. In this video, I asked the question, is Arctic sea ice actually disappearing as NOAA shows in this graph? The graph shows that Arctic September sea ice extent has declined about 30% since 1979, and Arctic March sea ice extent has also declined since 1979. So the question is, why did they start the graph in 1979? What they say on their website is that's the beginning of the satellite era, but I'm not so sure about that. This graph is from the 1990 IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it shows NOAA satellite data going back to 1974. Note that NOAA starts their current graphs right at this peak in 1979 and leaves off all the data prior to that, which was much lower. Why do they do that? Well, the reason why they do this is simple. By starting their graphs in 1979, right at the peak, they can show a linear downward trend, which gets blamed on carbon dioxide. But if they started their graph when their data actually begins in 1974, then it would look like a cycle, which goes up for a while and then comes down for a while. And that doesn't correlate very well with carbon dioxide. This story already looks bad for NOAA, but it gets much worse. There was another report written in 1985 by the Department of Energy titled Projecting the Climatic Effects of Increasing Carbon Dioxide. This was done by a study group who was the predecessor to the IPCC, and they showed Arctic sea ice data going all the way back to 1925, when it was high, then it declined to about 1955, rose again to 1965, and declined again to about 1974, when the IPCC data began from the 1990 report. It shows cyclical behavior rather than linear, and no correlation with carbon dioxide. So what happens if we merge the 1985 DOE graph and the 1990 IPCC graph? Well, let's try it and find out. I'm bringing the two graphs together at the same scale on both axes. This merged graph looks even more cyclical and less linear. There doesn't appear to be any correlation with carbon dioxide at all. Arctic sea ice increased from the mid-1950s until 1990. But something else really stands out in this graph. Look at 1979, where NOAA currently starts their sea ice graphs. It's right at the peak for the last century. By starting their graphs in 1979, they can show a sharp descent in sea ice since then.
This graph shows the summer and winter cycles of Arctic sea ice extent, and today it is perfectly normal. And of course, the trend line here is the red line. No alarm needed on this, is there?
There we are. So that's one of the deceit techniques they use. Not
Yes,
the only
cutting the grass, yeah.
Yeah, and that's from 1955. But if you think about it, it also correlates with history. We know we had the Ice Age cometh scare in the 70s. So the Ice Age coming in the 70s correlates with that graph completely. And we built it up, the ice built up to 79, and then it all changed. So they went from the Ice Age is coming, and everyone, the consensus was the Ice Age is coming. And then 1980, and they'll argue with that now, I know. But but my movie on this really goes and reports on it really in detail. And then 1979, it gets to this peak, and then but it didn't carry on. So they called it global warming. And then global warming was okay for a while, but when it got to 2000-ish, and it really wasn't carrying on, just like the ice didn't carry on, they called it climate change. And the climate change was great, because no matter which way it went.
Yeah.
And then what happened then was I years ago detected what they were doing, which is extreme weather alarmism. So any weather event, whether it be too much rain, too little rain, drought, flood, anything is blamed on the climate. People who haven't lived through these climate, I'm 77, so I was in charge of Wales, actually, as water resources in 1976 for the drought. So I'm experienced at these things. And I'm being an old man, if you like, I understand how weather can change. So, but if you start to look at it properly, some of the cycles are hundreds of years. Some of the cycles are 100,000 years, and so on. So it depends what you're looking at. But all I do in my video is in video after video after video, I take a subject and expose what they're doing. That's my job. Okay. So there's another excerpt out of one of my videos, okay? To do with this last year. Yeah.
Well, it all comes down to location, location, and location. Just where you put that temperature measurement, where you put that temperature station really matters. I mean, for example, with the recent 40.2 degrees record temperature in the UK, you wouldn't put it alongside one of the runways in Heathrow Airport, would you? But that's exactly what they've done. They've taken the record temperature from this station at Heathrow, with all the jets not just taking off and landing, but also taxiing and turning so the jets go right onto it. It is unbelievable. This climate station is right in the middle of the urban heat island effect. It's in the middle, basically, of a city, and the whole area is subject to a much higher temperature than the surroundings. London itself is claimed to be 10 degrees warmer than the outside countryside areas. And besides the aircraft, there are, of course, all the vehicles buzzing around the airport all the time. You couldn't put a temperature station in a worse place than that if you want to measure the ambient temperature of the air at a particular point.
So that was just a quickie out of that one. All I've done is give you a flavour of the work I do and the videos I do. But it's very frustrating for me because on that call with Professor Krauss and his associate, that palladium thing, it didn't happen because when they said they needed both of them to go against me, I agreed to that. So I agreed to two world-leading professors to debate me alone on that. But then they insisted that they control the debate as well, that they chair it. So I said no to that. And the producer said, no, I'll chair it because we've got to have it, even. And I said, I'm not going to have that. I mean, they said, well, basically, they can't afford to lose their case, which is not science. So that's where we are with that.
I'd love to actually find someone who would be willing to debate you and just have you on the show. I think that alone would be
Extinction
awesome.
Rebellion, bring them on. I challenge anyone. I mean, I can't lose because if they point out something I made a mistake on or something I'm wrong on, then I'll admit it because I'm better off then. I'm living in a world then where I know the truth rather than I've got it wrong. I'd much rather that. And that is what science is. It's not.
Yes.
It's not debating. It's the exact opposite. It's debating, So, I mean, I've shown you the world-leading professor on sea level rise is on my side, or I'm on his side. William Happer, a world-leading expert on this, and probably knows more about the CO2 molecule than anyone else. It's quite a complicated behavioral thing, the CO2 molecule, actually. I do go into it a bit on one of my videos. But he's on my side. So it isn't, I'm not alone here. But the way I'm treated is, like today, what one bloke said today, I'm debating, and he's just regurgitating the nonsense. And I know he's just regurgitating what he's been educated in. And so I try to be kind, but he said, well, who are you? Are you a scientist? Well, I answered him saying, well, no, I didn't say no. I said I'm a master of science and I've got a degree and I've got a master's degree and I'm highly experienced and I've built a mathematical model of weather and climate. And he didn't answer that. But I asked him, what are you? And then I pointed out, it doesn't matter who I am or who you are. All that matters is your argument. I don't care if you're the office cleaner. If you come up with a good point, you've got to counter that point. And to do it by rank or to do it by, only those can talk about it. The truth is that climate's an enormous range of subjects, from physics to statistics regression analysis, all these sorts of things. It's an enormous range of subjects. And so climate isn't just one discipline. So none of the climate scientists are really versed in all the different aspects. I'm just changing my screen over a bit there. They're really versed in all the different aspects. And so as long as you have a scientific education, which I have, and I happen to have a particular interest since 1970-71 when I built that model. And I know, in another paper I've done, they say the sun doesn't affect it that much, the radiation. It does. And there's a paper from an Israeli and Danish professor I published as a video and explain it. And they were held up terribly. Their paper, they were told, was wrong. Nature wouldn't review it properly because the maths were wrong. And they held it up for 2 years. And it got published 2 weeks after COP26. They held it up just till after the COP, and then it got published because then they said, yeah, the maths are right. And that's showing you that the sun has 5 or 6 times more influence than all the climate scientists have been claiming. Yeah. So I published papers. There's another one. There's another thing, video I published about intentional deception. And it was quite an amazing one. The professor in this case wrote a book on it. And he was a peer reviewer. And they had a system in NOAA in America where they divided North America into 6 regions. Then they predicted in this next year which one would be warmer or colder. Yeah. And they got 5 out of 6 wrong. So when he ran the model, they got 5 out of 6 wrong, which is worse than random. Randomly, you get 3 out of 6. Yes. So he took a 10-year average to do that. So he sent it off and said, it's wrong. Your model's wrong because it's worse than guessing. And they came back and said, actually, in writing, they came back and said, we checked it on a 10-year average, a 1 year, 5 year, 20 year. It's wrong. It's wrong on every one of them. I said, oh, great, then we won't be publishing that. Oh, yeah, we got to publish. You're going to publish it even though you know it's wrong? We got no choice. I wrote a book on that. Right? And my job there was in a short video to explain that, give you the reference to the book if you want to know more, but to explain the intentional deception of the bandwagon. So you've got the bandwagon in every area, the coral, the Great Barrier Reef, and you've got nice people who are nice people, I'm sure, like David Attenborough, who, in actual fact, make documentaries around the world. And I actually went to a place that Attenborough had been and had to compete with him on the video. We were lucky we got a unique video on that. But he's a nice man, I'm sure, but he's really gone off the rails on climate change. He doesn't understand the science. And I'd love to put him straight. But what I don't like about that is the walrus incident, where he did in the science television program, all the walruses coming over the cliff. Well, when you look at the big scene of that back on the sea, though, you can see all the walruses on the beach, and they sort of wind around this solid wall of walruses because there's no room left on the beach, and they go up on the cliff. Yes, there's so many of them. It's so successful, the feeding and the environment there, that there's so many of them. So what happens then is the polar bears come behind them, scare them off the cliff, then go and eat the dead bodies. They don't even have to fight them. Yes, that's what happens. So when this was pointed out to him with the evidence, the drone footage of the polar bears, everything, he didn't retract it. Yes, which is a bit disappointing. So
what was he saying? What was they actually claiming that the walruses had died from?
Climate change is forcing them to basically sacrifice themselves somehow.
But geez, they think the walruses were committing suicide.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, yes.
I mean, how would you even begin to get into the mind of the walrus that they know that, okay, there's too many of us, you've got to go,
I'm staying, by the way. I want to stay. And so on. I mean, I've been to Galapagos twice for extended times, actually. I sailed there once, and I went there for a conducted tour on each of the islands and so on. Fantastic place. And as I say, I'm really big into nature, and I'm really big. Oh, by the way, I sailed on my boat, because I've gone around the world on my boat. I sailed right through the Pacific garbage patch. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, what did you see?
I didn't see anything but sea. There wasn't a single cup or a single piece.
Really? Wow, that's mind blowing, man. I actually genuinely thought that was a thing.
Oh, no, no. Don't you understand how this is done? This is done by remote places that people can't get to, like the Arctic or the Antarctic. I've done one on the Antarctic because William Happer model shows you that the more carbon dioxide you've added, up to a point anyway, because these things are always like the red wall. If you paint a red wall, that was the example before.
Yes.
Happer. If you paint a wall red, it's going to be red. If you paint another coat, it'll be redder. If you paint a third coat, yeah, it could be a bit redder, but the fourth coat and everything, and they're on it just the same red. And that's like carbon dioxide. Anyway, in the Antarctic, the more carbon you've added originally, when it mattered, the colder it got. Whereas the rest of the world, the warmer it got, because it did add to the warming. There's no doubt about that. And so the colder it got. Why is that? Well, it's a huge continent, don't forget, huge. And it's very cold in the middle, very cold, and the air is very cold. And when you go up, it gets warmer. Whereas when you go up in England or most places, it gets colder. Yeah. And it's called the Antarctic inversion. So it's inverse the effect. So the more carbon you added, the more able to cool. And then we checked that against the European study, government study on Antarctic stations, the actual terrestrial stations. And it coincided. And it said over the last 40 years, it's cooled by a lot, 2.4 C. So that's a lot. And so the Antarctic's been cooling, yes. And you can just seen, I've just explained a video on how the Arctic, all these predictions, in 2007, it is going to be gone by 2014, pause, and done by the Navy. That study was done by the Navy, but you hear it all the time, how the Arctic ice is disappearing. It ain't disappeared. And by the way, the problem I'm dealing with now is I'm doing the little Ice Age video, but I've already done the medieval warm period video, which is warmer than today. And they did away with it. The hockey stick did away with all history. So the medieval warm period didn't really happen. The little Ice Age didn't really happen. And we just had this nice line cooling and cooling and cooling until man came along. And no one seemed to ask what happens when man doesn't come along. And you saw that graph, when it doesn't happen, all life ceases to exist. Today we have record harvests right around the world. Right around the world. Even Zimbabwe has got a record harvest this year. Africa's record harvest right around the world. And they're claiming 2/3 of that effect, roughly, is due to CO2, extra CO2, which is why they add the CO2 in a greenhouse. They get trebling the growth. So, because the other thing is, the Sahara Desert reduced in size over recent years. It's a German study, by the size of France and Germany added together. How? Well, these little pores I talked about in the leaves of plants that are breathing and have to open up to breathe in the carbon dioxide. When you add more, they can close a bit. And for every 100 molecules, every one molecule of CO2 they get, they have to lose 100 molecules of water. So the more CO2 you add, the less water you need on the plant. So when you need that, at the margins of the desert, the plants are allowed to progress. Yes,
that's really interesting. And I remember I did see that in one of your videos, and then it was very hard to find information because I suppose Google search results are being fiddled with. Yeah, it'd be good to have perhaps a link to that specific study you're talking about, where they measured that.
I'll email you back the link.
Yeah, and I can put that in the show notes. I think I'd like to see that, and people like to see that. It took me a while to find counter information, and you find that NASA study, and
One of my problems in searching out things is all the information is suppressed. There's a social media suppression. I'm sort of shadow banned on YouTube. You can't easily find my videos. With Paul Burgess, Real Climate Science is what I call myself. Yep. So I use my proper name and that. Once you're there, and you can look at all the videos and that.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the show notes.
They seem to be doing less of interfering, less warnings at the top and things these days. But I don't.
The videos are getting out there. People are sharing them. They're starting to get into quite big channels on Telegram and stuff. They're getting out there.
To explode for me. Can I also say I make no money out of it? I lose money. So when I go and give talks and things, or when I go and give a dinner to, because I try to influence politicians, so I won't name them, but I arrange a dinner for an editor of a magazine, political editor, and a very famous politician. And you're looking at, for me to go there to London and do that and come back, it's £1,000. And I'm trying to influence people of influence. I don't care whether they use my name or not, because all that matters to me, at my age, all that matters to me is that the message gets out there. That's all that matters. I want people to copy and share my videos as widely as they can. And I don't make money out of it, I promise you. I lose money. And I think in one video alone recently,
I spent about 300 or 400 quid on buying in the stills, to use, and so on. Because I have to, when I come across a subject I'm trying to explain, I try to get a video or a still so I can keep, because otherwise it'd just be text as dry as hell, So I
Yeah.
try to entertain with it. And
You do a pretty good job.
yeah.
The Nut Award was quite funny in one of your videos.
The what?
The Nut Award, the Nuts Award, and these nuts
yes.
and how nuts these politicians are.
That's right. And well, yeah. And I try to put a bit of humor in and entertain. So I'm trying to educate and entertain at the same time. And I have some of the people against me, and they post posts about 500 words long, with multiple subjects. So I now say, just stick to the subject in my video and I'll answer that. I answer every single comment. So everyone who comments on my videos, and all of them, when I get a copy of that, and I always reply, which is
Well, if you
unusual.
blow up, Paul, you might not be having the time, eh? I could see
Well,
there's huge
I may
demand
not.
for this.
I enjoy it. I
Info.
enjoy it. Most of all, I enjoy if I could educate kids. I was going to give a talk at a school, but they pulled out. But the talk.
Oh, really? Can you say what school that was?
No, I can't, because I
Okay,
don't want to
yeah.
embarrass the child involved. It's the child involved would be embarrassed. And but the teacher involved was very good. He's a very good teacher. He's a geography teacher, and he learned that I did other videos on other subjects as well. Anyway, the talk I was going to give wasn't about my views on climate. The talk I was going to give was what science is and how it has to be open, and be suspicious of anyone who won't debate it. And there's no such thing as consensus. No such thing as consensus in science. It doesn't exist. If there was, we wouldn't have progressed in so many areas. So many areas have been, the mavericks come across and said, sorry, gravity isn't a force. It's a distortion of space-time. Yeah, which it is. And I actually try to explain that to my grandchildren with a trampoline, and although actually 2-dimensional, it's really 3 or 4-dimensional. But I try to explain these things to my grandkids in simple terms. I bore people silly, probably. So, but what I've tried
I find
to
it
do,
fascinating myself. It's been just like unraveling it, and like the perspective it's given me on life is it's sort of taken away a lot of the doom and gloom. It's like, actually, we're living in like this amazing, abundant time. If you compare it to what they're trying to put out there, it's like this is the end of everything. Actually, like with crop yields exploding and stuff like that, it's like, wow, that's actually really interesting.
well, if you want to know about crop yields, just go to type in world of data on Google, and go to the world of data, put in crop yields, and you'll find all over the world every crop is exploding. Rice crops, everything is exploding. Yes, not what you're being told. Mind you, they're doing the best to try to stop farming, aren't they? They're doing ridiculous
yes
on farming, terrible things. So, and by the way, in Germany, the one study, 200,000 bats a year killed by wind farms. 200,000.
man.
They don't even have to get near it, because the vacuum causes the lungs to go, and they just drop 35, I think there are 3,500 tons of flying insects. It's affecting the migration of flying insects and birds, in great quantities of birds. Now, it's against the law to kill raptors in this country. It's against the law to kill hawks, but they are doing that. So I was thinking yesterday, why don't I take a legal case against a wind farm for killing birds?
It's a good one. Yeah,
against the law to do it. But the RSPB are woke as well, because they just sort of say it kills birds, but trying to do it less and so on. They're giving in to this fear mongering that's going on. And when you look into the world, all it's about, if you want to know what climate change is about, it's about a distribution of wealth from the rich nations to the poorer nations. That's all it's about. It's just the excuse for that. That's all it's about. It's coming really to the fore at the moment in COP27, but that's what it's about. Compensate us for this or that. You can't relate a single weather event, even like a hurricane or a drought or a storm. You can't relate that to climate. You have to look at the pattern of storms or hurricanes over time to see climate. Climate is weather over a long time. Sometimes even the 30 years is too little. Like I've just shown you on the ice, you have to look at a century to get an idea of it. Yeah. But look, what did you think of that deception that William Happer exposed on the ice? It's terrible, isn't it? That they only give you part of the curve.
Absolutely, that does sound like the tricks that they would play. That's the deception. That's the name of the game. And there was something that there was a graph you showed in one of your videos as well called climate-related deaths, and how That's plummeted.
From enormous figures down to less than 1%. It's under 1% of what it used to be. That's climate-related deaths.
Yeah, so what does that actually like? What is it? What is a climate-related death? And is that like
climate-related death is deaths due to a heat wave and floods, but and natural death and what's it called? There's another one which is 95%. It's 5%. It's now compared. It's 95% down. The other one, which is all sorts of disasters, hurricanes. That's climate. Volcanoes, earthquakes, which are not climate, of course. And they affect the climate, by the way, the volcano, of course, but they're not climate-related deaths. So if you take droughts, floods, things like that, cold, really deep cold, really big, huge heat, that's climate-related deaths, and they're a fraction of what they used to be. They're not even 1% of what they used to be. And I published that.
There it is.
That's it, climate-related. You brought that up, did you?
Yes.
Great.
I recently posted this on my social media. I took it from your video.
You can call it, well, it's just so there's the dot now at 220 and climate-related deaths. And that's floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, extreme temperatures. Wildfires are a tiny fraction of what they used to be, by the way. What they've done there is cut it. That's Biden. Biden is actually on wildfires, told the wildfire people in America to stop any records before the peak. They took the peak, yeah, and stopped all the records before it. Well, not the peak. They took 1980s something and then stopped all the records before it. We're about a sixth of what they used to be in the past on wildfires. So they hide the history and they deleted it from their website. But thank goodness people have got copies. That's how bad it is. So when you look at climate-related deaths, you wouldn't think it's almost zero. It's the dot there at the end of 220 is tiny. It's there, isn't it? It's tiny.
Yes.
And not even 1%. It's negligible. Right?
That's a really good one, because you hear about obviously what happened in Pakistan recently, and that just gets plastered all over the news, and everyone's like, "That's climate change," You
can't do this. Look, that's weather. That's weather. You've got to understand the difference in weather. If you want to look at that Pakistan flood, you'd have to look at the history of Pakistan floods, and even a cursory look will find much worse floods. Many more people died in the past than now. Yes. So, and again, if they didn't deforest the forest so much, they're deforesting at the most rapid rate in that part of the world, Pakistan. Yes. Now, if you deforest a catchment, the trees and the roots and all that act as a sponge that holds back the water. It holds back the peak. The water eventually gets into the river, but it holds it back. It takes the peak away. So it takes the flood away. And they've been deforesting at a terrific rate. And they're being heavily criticized for it, what they're doing, taking all the trees away. So you can't really, but the reason for it this year was the monsoon was more over that way than this way. Yes, it's weather. And that's happened in the past as well. And just look at history, you'll find them going back to 1950 straight away. You have to research for further back ones, but and they were much worse. So if it's worse in the past when CO2 was low, you can't argue with CO2 today, can you? You can't argue on anything weather is climate. It's the fundamental difference. And we've entered this extreme weather alarmism phase, where they're using anything, any weather event. This is a fact. We are now going through, in your lifetime, one of the most benign, gentle periods of weather in the world that we've ever had in living memory. And I can't say living memory, even further back, of course, we've ever had for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years.
I feel blessed.
The ice froze over in the Thames, not just the Thames, but the Baltic Sea. Holland froze over, Germany froze over, the Rhine. It all happened, and it happened for a few hundred years of it. There's a few hundred years of it. In fact, the Little Ice Age caused us to lose America because it managed to blast us with a terrible situation, the Little Ice Age, and kill our navy off, if you like. It forced famines onto people, which caused revolts in China, revolts in other countries, and brought back big political changes. Because when people had food and enough food to sell the surplus, everything was going fine. When they were starving, it ain't. And someone's got to blame, and that's when you get the revolts. And if you buy the book, there's a book out, a good book on the Little Ice Age, you'll see the effects on society for hundreds of years. And it was huge.
Can you remember the name of the book?
Well, it's called the Little Ice Age, but there's probably a few of those. But if you go to Amazon and look through the books on Little Ice Age, you can choose which one. But there's one in particular. It's only I got it on Kindle, and it was only a few quid, you know, so 3, 4, 5 quid or something. And it really is a good book to read. And but the political, the historical things. So what I'm doing today, the video I'm working on now, is about this. But in doing that, I have to explain. I mean, I have to explain things like the world today. If we didn't have any CO2, besides we wouldn't be alive, the world would be 25 degrees cooler. So CO2 certainly had its role in the early days when you originally painted the first layer of red on the wall and the second. Yeah, but it's not having the effect now. And extra CO2 in submarines, they breathe CO2 at 8 to 10,000 parts per million all the time. Yeah. Your house, I take a meter along with me. I could go and get one now if you want to see what it's like in this room. Yeah, I'll just do that. Right, the room I'm in is quite small, so I've been talking, I've been breathing it out. Yeah, and this takes a little while to adjust, but don't forget, on average, the accepted CO2 level around the atmosphere is 418, say. And we are now at that in the room.
Yeah, right.
So we're 1400 and odd and still rising. Because I'm in a small room with a human being, me. Yeah. If we had, and it's gone outside the limit now. There we are, 1540 and still going.
Why has it gone red? Is that dangerous?
No. What it is the wokeness has got into meters as well. And they put down the they're saying that it's over 2000 now, by the way, right? They're saying, I use this in meetings, and at the beginning of the meeting, if you've got a hall full of people and you put it on your desk, also I'll refer to this at the end, it's 2,500 now, because they're saying, you know, that more CO2 is bad. And it's built into the meter, but just measures CO2, which is all I'm interested in. So that's it. Look at it now.
Look at it go. Interesting.
Yeah, but if I breathed on it, now it'll go really fast now.
Oh wow. Yeah, see, so the old wives' tale of talking to your plants, that really does make sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
So there we are. So I've only been able to give a little smattering of what I do in this.
Been thoroughly insightful, though. I'm sure many people find a great benefit from this, and then they can. Well, you're just on YouTube right now, yeah, Paul Burgess.
Yeah, go on. I mean, my videos are Paul Burgess, Climate Realism.
Burgess, yeah.
I'll tell you what. If you put the best way to find me is say Paul Burgess, more CO2, please.
Yes.
That's one of my videos. You then get to my channel, and then if you click on videos, you'll see all the videos. Yes. If you click on, so it's across the top, it'll show you 3 or 4, and then you click videos and you get to all the videos. But if you say more CO2, please, that'll get you to my channel. Then you can bookmark the channel, and then you're into it, because I am hard to find otherwise. I have to have a fairly unique search because I think I'm shadow banned. Right?
Most likely, I am too. On nearly every platform, so I know the feeling.
And we're now up to 4,500.
You should be dead at some point or something, right?
Really? No, I mean, I wouldn't be dead at 10,000. 10,000 parts per million is what? It's less than one. Well, 1,000 is a thousandth of. It's 0.001.
Okay.
So it's 0.003.
So just to maybe finish off the show, I've just got one question. What would be your perfect amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? You'd be like, okay, this is an ideal amount that we should have.
Well, unfortunately, someone has worked out, and I haven't checked the calcs, but someone's worked out if you could, in the future, be making CO2, creating it for the purpose of putting it in, it'd be very hard to get past 600 or 700. It'd be very hard. But I think I would like the world to be 12 to 1,500, and I know we'd be really abundant. You know, the plants, we'd have to go back to the big plants, the huge plants that there's a greenhouse plant. You've seen the greenhouse image, have you, of the plants? Now, when this was taken, the ambient temperature wasn't 418, it was 385, yes? So on the left, you've got the 385, yeah? These have been grown over the same time, the same plant, the same time, but in different levels of CO2. So even going from 385 to 450, which is the right-hand one, look at the difference in size.
Yeah, so what's it? So he's got 150 in his hand there though, but beneath that there's a different number. What's that? What does that mean?
Sorry, where? The 450.
Yeah, he's got 450 in his hand there, then below that.
Yeah, no, you add 150. The first one's ambient here.
Yeah.
Then you add 150. So if you add 150,
okay. Oh yeah, sure.
385, you get
There's a
535.
plus there, yeah.
So you add 300, you add 450, you get 835. And you can see the difference in size you get, the difference in yield you get from the plant.
Yes.
And it's enormous.
Absolutely. I mean, when you factor that into growing food, that's really interesting.
Well, they do. Tomatoes are grown in greenhouses with extra CO2.
Yeah.
Those nice big ripe tomatoes you see all laid out nice and neat in the supermarket are grown in greenhouses. Lots of things are. And what they do is they have CO2 emitters in the greenhouse. And it's like a set of Bunsen burners giving off the gas. Funnily enough, even pure CO2 in a container is less effective than actually having the burn through a Bunsen burner. And they probably because of the extra heat maybe, but there's a little array in a tin, in a metal thing for safety, and it just emits gas. It just burns off the flame in the air. And that's what your CO2 is, how your CO2 is produced in the green. You can buy them. If you Google commercial greenhouse CO2 emitters, you'll find them. But that's how it's done. It's the food of life. Without CO2, we're all dead. It's essential to life. And by accident, I mean, why should we go back to an accident? That very first graph I showed you showed where it was down to 285. There's no doubt mankind has put it in, by the way. There's no doubt about that at all. I'm not saying it's put it all in, because as the oceans warm from the Little Ice Age, the oceans would slowly emit more as well, but it takes time, there's a lag. So it does take time, that. But so most of it, I think, is put in by man. Yeah, I'm not arguing at all with that. You see, if people listen to me, I'm not trying to deny it's a greenhouse gas. I'm not trying to deny it's contributed a good amount to the warming. But the warming of over a degree is actually good for us. The tropics don't warm on the models. And by the way, every model of theirs is wrong. Every single one. I mean, if you take the actual and compare them to the models, we haven't got science here. We've got someone's opinion, which is a model. That's not science. And science is, you have to, without science being checked against the real world, the data in the real world, no matter how good the theory, I think Feynman said this, no matter how good the theory, no matter how good your idea, no matter how beautiful it is, if it doesn't check against reality, it's wrong. Full stop. Yeah, check it out. Start again. That is how science works.
So you just see that the tropics aren't warming?
No, even the models show if you warm the Earth, it tends to warm from the subtropical. It tends to warm just the part in the. It warms towards the poles more than it warms in the equator, the tropics. Okay. It warms to say.
Sounds like a good balance, yeah. So we get the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, that's right. An actual fact, a huge benefit. Look, Greenland used to be populated by the Vikings. The buildings are still there. Yeah, you can't do it now. You can't farm in Greenland now. Yeah, and yet, if it was hotter in the, one of my videos said, look, if I can show you it's hotter in the medieval warm period than it is today, then it blows everything out the water, because naturally we're hotter than today. They're arguing we're the hottest ever and things. But in actual fact, it was hotter in the medieval warm period. And I give lots of scientific papers all over the world, in South America, in Australia, in Africa, South Africa. I give lots of evidence that that was warmer. We grew wine up in Scotland, for God's sake, and so on. But they'll argue, oh, it's just local. And then I've started off my video now with the planet Earth rotating, and their theory, what they're telling you, I put a line across it, the equator, and I say this northern part they're accepting was colder, but the rest of it wasn't. Not just for a day or a year, but for hundreds of blinking years. No way. It's not possible, right? So, and we have very few people in the southern part below the equator. People don't understand this. Nearly all the land masses on Earth are north of the equator, nearly all. And so you've got most of the south is ocean, and the southern Atlantic with these enormous waves are because you've got water all around the world. There's no land to get in the way, which is why when people sail around the world and go through that, which I don't do, going through the southern, I go a different route, going through the southern Atlantic, that is really brave. You know, Ellen MacArthur and all these people, really brave to do that because it really is vicious. And the reason is there's nothing to stop the waves building up as they come around the world. Yeah. And so it builds and builds and builds. Whereas if you've got Australia in the way or something, it'll calm it down. Yeah. There's something to bash the energy against and get rid of it. Yeah.
Interesting. Yes.
So I'll just close that one.
Yep.
So there we are. So I mean, I can William Happer's a good one to follow as well. Professor William Happer. Look at some of his interviews online. He's on YouTube.
Yep.
It's HAPPEI. He's good. And Tony,
Tony Heller.
Yeah, he's good. So there's a few of us now, and my job is to take the things. I use other people as well. I look at something. Oh, I want to explain that easily, and that sort of thing. So the Little Ice Age is my subject I'm working on now, and it's fascinating. How it changed history, the Little Ice Age, and it really is fascinating. And it was hundreds of years. It wasn't simple. And also, all the big expansions of societies have been in the warm periods, not the cold periods. We have the Dark Middle Ages, it's bloody cold. We have the Roman Empire was all in the warm period, the Roman warm period. The medieval warm period, then we blossomed, yes. And
yeah,
so
when I was thinking about when I was just getting even just before I really started to research it, and it's like, oh, global warming. I mean, that really sounds so bad for the UK. We get less cold winters and better summers. I mean, what's not to like about that?
with global warming, we get less wind because basically there's less difference because weather, which I've given lectures on weather for years and years ago, and weather is caused by differences. Weather is all about the difference. So you take in air from a high pressure to a low pressure, or and so on. So you've got wind flows, and that's what it's about. And if you've got less difference, you'll have less weather. It's as simple as that, which is why you get less hurricanes now.
Yeah? Fascinating.
And by the way, when there were no hurricanes, I think last year or the year before, there was a dearth of hurricanes, a famine of hurricanes. They actually said, oh, the lack of hurricanes could be due to climate change. You can't win.
There's no way to win, right?
There's no way to win. No way to win.
Yeah.
And, everything is down to climate change. Mental health is down to climate change. But what we have done is scare a lot of children and a lot of innocent people who don't follow science and just listen to all the mainstream media news.
Absolutely.
But the world's changing. Do you know why the world's changing? Because the pigeons have come home to roost with the energy crisis. We're begging people to extend coal power. We're trying to build nuclear as fast as possible. Yeah. We're begging for gas. We closed down the gas storage. In fact, it was Liz Truss who closed down the gas storage in the UK. It was under the North Sea, the gas storage. A huge thing. And she closed it down in 2016. And now they're having to try to reopen it as fast as they can. So that proves you were wrong, doesn't it? If you're having to reverse your nuclear policy, if you're having to reverse your gas policy, if you're having to cling on to coal, etc., the excuse they've got is the war, but the Ukrainian war. But that is an excuse. It's not the truth. The truth is you did all this. You got rid of nuclear and put fossil fuels in their place. What planet are you on? If your terms were to reduce CO2, why take away something that didn't do the CO2 and add something in its place that did, the gas? Which country, which highly developed country, has reduced its CO2 most in the last decade?
I'd love to know.
USA.
Oh, yeah?
Big drop in 2016 when Trump came in. Big drop in CO2 output, right? Because it was fracking. And the frack gas is much cleaner than the other one. So fracking reduces CO2. which is a bad thing for me. But
yes, I was about to say, yeah, that's interesting. You flip the narrative there. We
yeah.
want CO2.
So fracking reduces CO2 because CO2, the gas from fracking is a very clean gas compared to the alternative gas. Yes. So that alone, and it's a sharp graph like that, And again, China in 8 years has put more CO2 in. That's between 2012 and 2020. Put more CO2 into the atmosphere than we have done from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when we started until 2020. Yeah,
that is an incredible statistic.
that
But
is
then it looks like we should be, in some weird, twisted way, it sounds almost thanking China for doing that, which is mad, really.
I don't mind. I don't mind. And I actually don't blame China. We've exported all industry there, which is wrong, but we've exported industry. So instead of us producing in products and a very strict environmental rules in UK, we let them produce it by lousy experimental rules in China and pollute and everything else. We allow that, right? So what we've done is increase the world pollution by exporting to a lower standard country environmentally. But we can't blame them if we cheat by saying we've reduced this, and all we've done is decimate industries, which we're now managing to decimate really, really well with the energy crisis. I mean, how can steel survive? It can't. Do you know how much they pay for a kilowatt of energy in China?
It's a fraction of the price. I do remember seeing this in one of your videos. I can't remember the statistic though.
It's 6.5 pence for the domestic and 7.5 pence a kilowatt for the industrial. Here, I know of companies having to pay 70, 80p per kilowatt for industrial. So, and by the way, we've got a great idea this winter. Let's pay people not to produce electricity at peak times. And they're going to offer it to the public and they're already doing it to commerce. They're saying, if you agree not to take electricity, we're going to pay you a lot of money. And apparently the payments are up to 10 times the cost of electricity. So we'll pay you, £3, £4 an hour, not to be using electricity at 33p an hour, which it is for me at the moment. I mean, this is how mad the world's become. I mean, these politicians are out of their depth. They're really. People like Lord Frost see right through it. And I think Rees-Mogg sees right through it as well. He knows, but he can't say what he really believes. And one day I'm going to hear someone on television say, "We want more CO2, please." I never heard.
Yes.
That's me. That's my big message. We need more CO2, please, because it's basically a very beneficial thing to have. We're not going to heat up the tropics too much or anything, and a little bit of extra warmth here means that we'll grow a lot more in those places, And as regards the droughts, I've just shown you the data on the droughts in the UK, for example, and how you've been totally misled. And I've also used a government document from the Environment Agency to support what I came up with. Yeah. And
brilliant. Well, I think we have absolutely dismantled a huge part of the climate con, and it's already been 2 hours. Can you believe it's absolutely flown by?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, don't worry, man. This is incredibly insightful, and I'm sure a lot of people will find huge benefit from everything we've spoken about. So thank you, Paul, for taking the time.
Thank you. At the end, it's for my grandchildren I do this, for their quality of life, and for the generation I don't gain. So it's for those kids to have a better life and get rid of these mad governments and stop this madness. Okay.
We'll do our best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.